The screen doesn't open with tanks or missiles. It opens with numbers. Cargo ships crossing oceans, factories glowing through the night, satellites circling the Earth, and two flags moving in opposite directions. For decades, the United States stood alone at the top of the world, its currency, its military, its ideas shaping the global order. But quietly, patiently, another power was rising. Not through sudden conquest, but through long-term planning. Today, China is no longer just catching up. It is challenging the very system the United States built. This isn't a loud war. There are no front lines, no formal declarations. Yet it may be the most important struggle of the 21st century, one that will decide who controls money, technology, trade routes, and even the future of global rules. The question is not whether China is challenging the US. The real question is why, and how it reached this point without the world fully realizing what was happening. To understand this rivalry, we must go back to a time when China and the United States were not enemies, but unlikely partners. After the Cold War, America emerged as the world's undisputed superpower. Its economy dominated, its military had no equal, and its political model was seen as the final destination of human progress. China, on the other hand, was still poor, cautious, and largely ignored. The US opened its markets, believing that trade would transform China into a familiar, Western-style nation. But China had a different plan. Instead of copying America, it studied it. Instead of confronting power, it absorbed it. Over decades, China used globalization to rebuild itself, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty, while quietly strengthening its industry, technology, and influence. Now, as China's confidence grows and America's dominance faces strain, the world is witnessing a historic shift. This is not just a clash between two nations. It is a collision between two visions of the future. And to understand where the world is heading next, we must first understand why China has decided that the age of American supremacy can no longer go unchallenged. For much of modern history, China was not a rising power, it was a broken one. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, foreign empires carved China apart, imposed unequal treaties, and humiliated what was once the world's most advanced civilization. This period, remembered in China as the century of humiliation, left a deep psychological scar. When the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, it was driven by a single obsession: never again. Under Mao Zedong, China sought strength through revolution and self-reliance. But decades of isolation and failed economic experiments kept the nation poor and inward. Everything changed in the late 1970s. Deng Xiaoping understood something revolutionary. The ideology alone could not restore China's greatness. He opened China to the world, inviting foreign investment, encouraging manufacturing, and allowing controlled capitalism under strict political control. China did not abandon communism, it adapted it. Factories multiplied, cities expanded, and millions moved from farms to industrial centers. While the West saw cheap labor, China saw opportunity. But this rise was not accidental. It was strategic. China studied history and learned that power is built slowly. Unlike past empires that expanded through conquest, China focused on economic foundations first. Roads, ports, education, and industry became weapons. By the early 2000s, China was no longer just developing, it was accelerating. What once was a wounded civilization had transformed its pain into ambition. China's rise was not about revenge, but restoration. And as its strength returned, so did a belief that it deserved a central place in the world once again. While China was rebuilding itself quietly, the United States was experiencing its greatest moment in history. After World War II, America stood untouched, wealthy, and dominant. Its military bases spanned the globe, its corporations shaped global markets, and its currency became the backbone of international trade. When the Cold War ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union, America didn't just win, it stood alone. For the first time, a single nation held unmatched economic, military, and cultural power. This dominance shaped how America viewed the world. Global institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and World Trade Organization were built around American values and interests. Democracy and free markets were presented not as choices, but as the inevitable future for all nations. Many in Washington believed history had reached its final chapter, with the US as its permanent leader. China, in this view, was not a threat, it was a project. By allowing China into global trade systems, America believed prosperity would bring political change. As China grew richer, it was expected to liberalize, democratize, and eventually align with the US-led order. For years, This assumption went unchallenged. American consumers benefited from cheap goods, corporations profited, and policymakers saw no reason to worry. But beneath this confidence was a blind spot. America underestimated how a patient civilization, guided by long-term thinking rather than election cycles, might use the same system differently. While the US enjoyed its unchallenged power, China was learning its weaknesses. And history shows that moments of absolute dominance often plant the seeds of future rivalry. The real battlefield between China and the United States is not fought with soldiers, is fought with supply chains. As America shifted toward finance, services, and technology, China focused relentlessly on production. It became the world's factory, manufacturing everything from toys to advanced electronics. This wasn't coincidence, it was policy. China understood that whoever controls production controls leverage. American companies outsourced to China to cut costs, while China absorbed skills, technology, and expertise. Over time, entire industries migrated. The US gained cheap goods, but lost manufacturing strength. China gained jobs, experience, and economic independence. Trade imbalances grew, but the deeper shift went unnoticed. Wealth flowed through Wall Street, while power slowly accumulated in Chinese industrial zones. Then came China's next move, expansion beyond its borders. The Belt and Road Initiative promised infrastructure to developing nations' ports, railways, power plants. To many countries, China offered what the West no longer did: fast money with fewer political conditions. Critics called it debt diplomacy. Supporters called it development. Either way, China was building influence with concrete and steel. This economic rivalry exposed a fundamental difference. America's power rests on markets and confidence. China's rests on control and planning. One depends on global trust, the other on physical presence. As tensions grew, tariffs, sanctions, and trade wars followed. What once looked like cooperation now felt like dependence. And the world began to realize that economics was not just about money, it was about power. And China was no longer playing by America's rules. In the modern world, power is no longer defined only by armies or territory, but by algorithms, data, and microchips. China understood this earlier than most. While America dominated the digital revolution, China focused on mastering the next one: artificial intelligence, 5G networks, quantum computing, and semiconductors became the new battlegrounds. Whoever leads in these fields will shape economies, surveillance, warfare, and even human behavior itself. Chinese tech giants rose rapidly, supported by state planning and massive domestic markets. Companies like Huawei were not just businesses, they were strategic assets. To the United States, this was alarming. Technology was once America's uncontested advantage, but now China was closing the gap, sometimes surpassing it. The fear was not just competition, but dependence. If Chinese technology became global infrastructure, then data, influence, and security could follow. This is why chips became the new oil. Advanced semiconductors power everything from missiles to smartphones. And America moved quickly to restrict China's access. Export bans, sanctions, and alliances were formed to slow China's technological climb. But China responded with massive investment in self-reliance. What began as cooperation turned into containment. Unlike previous arms races, this one is invisible to most people. There are no parades, no explosions, just silent lines of code shaping the future. And as both nations race forward, the stakes grow higher. Technology is no longer just innovation, it is control, and neither side can afford to fall behind. For decades, China's military strategy was simple: avoid confrontation. But as China's economic power grew, its security concerns expanded. Trade routes stretched across oceans, energy supplies flowed from distant regions, and vulnerabilities became clear. Protecting these interests required more than diplomacy, it required force. China began modernizing its military at a speed unseen in modern history. Its navy expanded rapidly, missiles became more precise, and cyber and space capabilities quietly developed. The goal was not to match the US ship for ship, but to make American power costly to use. This strategy, known as denial, focuses on keeping rivals at a distance, rather than defeating them outright. The South China Sea became a symbol of this shift. Artificial islands, military bases, and patrols transformed disputed waters into strategic strongholds. To the US, this challenged freedom of navigation. To China, it was about historical claims and security. Taiwan, meanwhile, stood as the most sensitive issue of all, a line neither side wanted to cross, yet neither could ignore. China's military rise changed the balance in Asia. For the first time in decades, American dominance was no longer unquestioned. The message was subtle but clear. China would no longer remain defenseless in a world shaped by others. Beyond economics and weapons lies a deeper divide: belief. The United States promotes a world built on democracy, individual freedom, and open societies. China offers an alternative: stability over liberty, collective prosperity over individual expression, and centralized control over political pluralism. China argues that its system delivers results. Rapid development, poverty reduction, and long-term planning are presented as proof that democracy is not the only path to success. For many developing nations, this message resonates. They see China's rise as evidence that Western models are not universal. To the US, this ideological challenge is dangerous. It undermines the idea that liberal democracy is inevitable. China does not seek to export revolution, but it does seek acceptance of its model. A world where multiple systems coexist weakens American moral leadership. This clash of ideas shapes diplomacy, media, and global narratives. Each side accuses the other of hypocrisy. And while missiles may never fly, belief systems are already colliding. In the struggle for the future, ideology remains a silent but powerful force, a world no longer centered on Washington. As the rivalry between China and the United States intensifies, the true contest is increasingly being fought far from both their borders. Across Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, China has expanded its presence with remarkable speed. It arrives not with lectures about governance, but with roads, ports, power plants, and loans. For many developing nations, China offers something the West often does: not rapid infrastructure without political conditions. This approach has reshaped how influence is built in the modern world. For decades, the United States relied on alliances, institutions, and shared values to maintain leadership. But wars, economic crises, and internal divisions weakened its appeal. China stepped into this space quietly. By investing in strategic locations and critical infrastructure, it gained leverage over trade routes and governments. Critics warn of debt traps. Supporters point to growth and opportunity. Either way, China's footprint is expanding, and countries are increasingly choosing pragmatism over ideology. This shift signals a deeper change. The world is no longer automatically aligned with Washington. Nations are hedging their bets, balancing relations between great powers rather than committing to one. For the first time in generations, global influence is becoming multipolar, and China is a central force shaping that reality. No issue captures the tension between China and the United States more than Taiwan. To Beijing, Taiwan is not just a territory, it is a symbol of unfinished history. Reunification is framed as inevitable, even sacred. To the United States, Taiwan represents both a strategic partner and a test of credibility. If America fails to protect it, allies across Asia may question US commitments. Taiwan's importance goes beyond politics. It sits at the heart of global semiconductor production, making it economically critical to the entire world. Any conflict here would disrupt supply chains on a scale never seen before. This is why both sides tread carefully, yet push boundaries. Military drills, political visits, and diplomatic statements create a dangerous rhythm of escalation and restraint. What makes Taiwan so volatile is not desire for war, but fear of weakness. China worries delay signals acceptance of separation. The US fears restraint, signals retreat. In this narrow space between deterrence and disaster, the future of global stability hangs. History offers a troubling pattern. When a rising power challenges a dominant one, conflict often follows. This idea, known as the Thucydides trap, haunts US-China relations. Both nations are aware of it, and both claim to want peace. Yet competition drives actions that increase mistrust. Military buildups, economic decoupling, and information warfare create a cycle difficult to escape. Unlike past rivalries, this one is deeply interconnected. The US and China trade trillions of dollars, share technologies, and influence each other's economies. War would be catastrophic for both. But history shows that fear, pride, and miscalculation can override logic. The challenge now is managing competition without collapse. Cooperation on global issues like climate change exists, but suspicion dominates. The question is no longer whether rivalry exists, but whether it can be controlled. The struggle between China and the United States is not a temporary crisis. It is a defining feature of this century. China seeks recognition, security, and influence equal to its power. The US seeks to preserve an order it built and benefited from. Neither side sees itself as the aggressor. Both believe they are defending stability. The future may not bring a single winner. Instead, the world could fragment into spheres of influence, competing technologies, and divided economies. Or it could evolve into uneasy coexistence, where rivalry is intense but managed. What is clear is that neutrality is becoming harder. Every nation, every company, and even every individual will feel the impact. History is being written, not by sudden events, but by slow shifts. And in this moment, as China challenges the United States, the world stands at the edge of a new era, one whose outcome is still undecided, but whose consequences will shape generations to come. This rivalry is not about hatred, and it is not about one nation being good and the other being evil. It is about power, fear, and history repeating itself in a modern form. The United States rose in a world shaped by war and emerged as its architect. China rose in a world shaped by globalization and learned how to bend that system to its advantage. Now, both stand face to face, each convinced it is protecting stability, each convinced the other is the threat. The danger is not intention, but misunderstanding, small decisions made under pressure that slowly close the space for compromise. The world is no longer watching from the sidelines. Every country, every economy, every technology is being pulled into this competition. The choices made in Washington and Beijing will ripple across borders, markets, and lives. History teaches us that great power rivalries do not announce their outcomes in advance, they unfold quietly, until suddenly they define an era. Whether this challenge ends in cooperation, Cold War, or conflict is still unwritten. But one thing is certain: the age of unquestioned American dominance is fading, and the age of a confident China has begun. The future will not be decided by who shouts the loudest, but by who adapts the fastest. And as this new chapter of history opens, the world must ask itself not who will win, but what kind of world will be left behind when the struggle is over. If you found this video insightful and want more deep, story-driven breakdowns of history and global power, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. New documentaries like this help you understand not just what's happening in the world, but why it's happening. Subscribe, like, and share, because the future makes more sense when you know the past.